The story of the blue sweater is very interesting. I wanted to belong to the other girls my age, and they all had black sweaters. They belonged to the BDM, which is the Bund Deutsche Mädchen. And there was a black sweater with green, and I think it had yellow stripes around the neck and buttons down the front. And my mother never, well, I didn't get one. That was number one. I wasn't allowed to have one. And my mother wasn't really a knitter, but in Ecuador she knit me a blue sweater like this with the same color stripes, but it was blue, it wasn't black. And I was absolutely furious, and I had a temper, and I don't know what I said. So my mother, who had been blocking it with a steam iron, left the steam iron and followed me because I was furious. I left the room, and she burnt a hole in the sweater, and that was the end of the sweater, and I felt victorious because I finally didn't have to have the substitute. I wanted to belong. I think I was about 8 years old when there was an attempted rape on me. I still had my doll carriage, and I went walking, and along came this man in uniform, and my mother had said already, don't trust people in uniform. You know, be cautious. And this man asked me, he wore glasses, and he said that he can't read the names in the building. Could I go into this building and read the tenants' names, you know, so that he knew where to go. Well, I went in, and he started to pull my shirt up and my pants down, and somehow I just ran. I left the doll carriage, and I ran home, you know, crying, and went on the couch. I didn't want to talk to my mother. But finally, when my father came home, I told him the story, and my mother immediately marched me to the police station. And my father was hysterical. My mother going to the police station, what's going to happen now? But there was a 4-year-old girl, and I remember this man had like a pretzel on his shoulder, a design of a pretzel. Well, this 4-year-old said it was an SS officer. And there was a lineup, and I guess we pointed them out. And my father was just hysterical. My mother was at the police station, and he was concerned, and you know, about my mother. And years later, when my father was in his 90s, I asked him, how did you feel? Did I get any support? No. You know, he looked at me like, you know, he was concerned about my mother, never mind me. The mother was the important thing. So that was a disappointment, you know, that I never had any acknowledgement from him, what I went through. At one point in school, we had to make a family tree so that the Nazis could pick out who's Jewish, who has Jewish people in their family tree. And my father immediately went to the police station, and he said he's not Jewish, and we weren't raised Jewish. And so I had permission to just make the family tree of his family and leave out my mother's whole family. And I went back, I think, 4 or 5 generations. And I still have the original copy that I made at the time. Then I was allowed back in school. And I have the paper where I was dismissed vacation with the German Hitler stamp on there, and the next day I could go back, and I have that paper, you know, my vacation had ended. But I had to sit in back of the room and not participate in the Lutheran religious classes that they had. School was just ordinary, except that the girls wore the black sweaters, which I wanted. And I didn't really have school friends. I never went to anybody's house from school to visit. There was one other family we visited. They were, obviously they were Jewish. Their last name was Jaffe, Jaffe, and I have no idea what country. They probably went to Australia or Israel, Palestine at that point. But I never went to any school friends' houses, and they just didn't invite me, you know. I was more with my parents' friends' children that where we gathered in the summer bungalow, and those were my schoolmates. I guess I was not invited to schoolmates' houses because I had this Jewish mother, which I didn't even know that she was Jewish, you know. I just had a Jewish grandmother. I didn't have a Jewish mother. We weren't religiously oriented, but I guess in school they knew, and I just wasn't invited. I was born in the Hufeisen, which is now a World Heritage Site, and what do I say? It was a wonderful development. We had friends, and I played with children across the street. We had a small garden. I had a garden. My father planted a pear tree, and a very narrow lot, because there was, I don't remember how many families, 1,500 families or something like this lived in the place. But as I got older, I also went to a kindergarten in this place, which was a Montessori school. And in the yard that we had, very narrow, it had a path going up. And the first time I went there to visit, I said, "Oh, I remember this path." And the people who lived there said, "Oh yeah, it leads to another path between the next row of houses and back of us." And I said, "Well, I remember walking that." And I just walked down the path. I must have been 2 years old. And they said, "Were you running away from something?" And I said, "Oh no, I just wanted to see where the path led." And I went to the end of the path, and some man, a policeman, picked me up and kept me overnight, and the next day returned me. Now these were quiet days before policemen could be trusted, and before the Hitler scare. So I was returned home, and my parents were greatly relieved, obviously. The community in the area was mixed. There were some very rigid Germans living there already, and there were some Jewish families. We had friends, our Dr. Jacoby, who then went to Palestine with daughter Ellen. This is how I named my oldest daughter Ellen. This was my friend. And they were just gardens, and there was a pond, and we could walk around the pond with hula hoops at the time, and it was just a very pleasant, relaxing atmosphere. Later on, I learned when I went back, I had gone back there with my father and my granddaughter and my grandson. We found out that where my father's cousin lived, Anton Juretschke, he lived in an apartment where the former Hess, the Dr. Hess from the concentration camps, had lived, and he's the one who did the experimenting on Jews. But they lived in that house till they died. The Panama Canal was really an experience for me. I loved the locks. We also had locks in Berlin, so I was always interested in water flowing, but these doors opening and closing, and the water level rising, and the boat rising or going down, where the boat was almost in a canyon, all the way down as the water went out. And it took me a long time to realize that the Panama Canal was going north instead of south. I thought we were going south to Ecuador, but here we were going north. And in Panama, I saw the first black people that I had ever seen before, and it was interesting, I was curious, I was interested, but the Panama locks were absolutely fascinating. My parents experienced Ecuador differently from me. I think they were relieved to finally get away from Germany, but I didn't really pay too much attention to my parents' feelings. My feelings were, to me, more important. I was almost 11, and in Germany, my life was restrained. Be careful and don't talk to policemen and don't do this and don't draw attention to yourself. While here, nobody bothered me and I felt free. And since my mother was disgusted with the dirt and the filth in Quito, I did most of the shopping. And it was an adventure for me. So I felt free and I felt grown up and I felt great. So I really, my parents were more relieved than I was. I mean, I was relieved in that I could be more grown up. In Quito, we were part of the immigrants that came from Germany. We weren't part of a Jewish community. We didn't even know there was a Jewish community, really. We were just free thinkers, atheists. So we didn't pay attention to the other Jews. It was, well, if there was a Jewish community, we really weren't aware of it. I think they were, but in name they didn't mean anything to me. Margaret Selig was Jewish, and Vera Lenk, I guess, was Jewish. Well, they came over with us on the boat from Germany, but it didn't mean anything to me. The only Jewish thing I knew was the Jewish grandmother that I used to have. I don't think the fact that we were like free thinkers or atheists set me apart. I didn't feel any different. I just felt much, much freer in Quito, in Ecuador, than I did in Germany. One of the things my parents knew, that there were earthquakes in Ecuador. So, of course, we each had a suitcase. My parents had a suitcase with passports and money and I don't know what else. And I had a suitcase with a change of clothing by my bed in case we had a run. And that was it. And life was fine. And one day during dinner, one of the vases on the table started to bounce and dance around. And we were thinking, oh, what's going on here? You know, this is strange. Well, then it stopped. And then the next day we found out that indeed this was an earthquake. And in the street there were a couple of streets that were disrupted. Like they had like broken up the streets. And the other thing about Ecuador was across the street from us there was a lot of mud, a lot, L-O-T, not yeah, L-O, like a housing lot without the house. And it was mud. And the women there, the native women, Ecuadorian women, would have their skirts tucked into their stockings or pants or something up, and barefooted they would mush this mud where they were making adobe bricks. And this fascinated me, you know, to have all this squishing in between the toes. The visual things really got me in Ecuador. So this was fascinating watching this. The street Rio de Janeiro went up a hill. I don't know how high up it went. I think the number was in the 39 or 37 or something like that, but I could be entirely wrong. And the street was also made out of adobes. I think most of the buildings there were made out of adobes because of the earthquake. This way they wouldn't just crumble, but they would sort of bend and break, you know, have a fissure without falling apart. The upstairs there were, I think, maybe 4 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms. One of them we always rented out. And there was a walkway to the kitchen. The walkway went over the yard. We could look down on the yard and watch the dogs playing and watch the abuela doing the laundry or the cooking over the charcoal fire. And the kitchen was at the other end. And that's about all I remember about it. But there was also a workshop on this veranda because my father started to build beach chairs and sewing boxes, pull-out sewing boxes, and tea carts that my brother then went around selling to the locals. Having a suitcase by my bed, a getaway bag, really for me, from what I remember, started in Ecuador. I didn't start in Germany, although my parents may have been prepared for something in Germany. But in Ecuador, I had this because of earthquakes, in case there was an earthquake and we had a run. So I had a change of clothing in there. And then in the United States, after 9/11, well, we were mandated to have a getaway bag in case we had to get out and run. So I have a getaway bag at home in my closet with a list that I have to add my glasses, my hearing aid, my prescription pills, and my driver, and so on, and, you know, visa. But it's always been a part of my life. My family wanted to leave Ecuador because Ecuador was only a stopover for 14 months or so, because we couldn't come straight away to America because the quota for Jews was closed. So we had to make a stopover in the interim. And when the quota was finally opened, we were able to go to America. And the reason we wanted to go to America is because my mother had 3 brothers here and a sister, and my father had a brother here, here in America. And that was the main reason. And they were mostly, they were located in New York. So that was our destiny. We were on a ship owned by the Grace Line, and the name was the Santa Maria, and it was the last commercial trip that this ship was making before it was refitted to get into the war effort. So one of the two things I remember vividly about it is that my parents, my family, were the only family in steerage, but there was a first class, and somehow my parents found somebody they talked to some of the people in the first class, and they found out that I liked swimming, so they invited me up there for their pool. And pool water has always been my element, so I could go swimming there. And the other thing that is so vivid to me, especially in this day of the plastics in the ocean, is that everything on the ship went overboard. I can see the mattresses to this day flying overboard into the water, and chairs, and benches, and dishes, and everything that the boat was going to get rid of for the war effort was just dumped into the ocean. And it still bothers me. We landed in New York in August, and I don't recall seeing the Statue of Liberty at all. And I do know that we didn't go through Ellis Island. I visited Ellis Island later on a visitor's tour. But the amazing thing was that there was family. There was hordes of family visiting, greeting us on the dock when we got out. And one of the scariest things for me was the first night I had to sleep I slept in my father's brother's house, and he had glasses like the man who had raped me, the attempted rape in Germany. And at this point I decided I have to stop sucking my thumb. I'm a grown up, I have to face this. And I was so scared, but I wanted to be more grown up and not dependent on my pacifier. And this was hard. Then I was moved to my aunt in Lynbrook, Long Island, where my cousin also lived, and with my aunt. And they owned the Lynbrook Diner at the point. They've always been cooks, the family. And I met my cousin there, one of my mother's brother's daughters, Eleanor. And we became friends. We're still friends to this day. This was the first time that I met most of the family. The only one I knew was my mother's sister, nicknamed Muki. Her name was, the German name on her passport was Selma. She had been living in France and helping, working with refugee children there, where her own, I think her son was born there. I'm not quite sure, or my cousin was born there. But she helped refugee children there in an orphanage. And Josephine Baker, I think, had a home there, and this is where they were raising the children. And she's the only one that I knew of the relatives. The others, all I had to meet first time. Well, leaving Ecuador was, I was ready for another adventure. And it was a shock for me to get to America, because here I was not Jewish. My father tried to get me into the German Turnverein, where they did the gymnastics, and it was too German for me. And then they tried to get me into the Jewish center, Jewish community, and it was absolutely foreign for me, so I wasn't there either. So the kids, they put me in my proper class in junior high school, except in the remediate class, the 7R class, which was right for my age, but because I didn't speak English, they put me in there in the remedial class, and it was too difficult for me. But the kids said, greeted me with Heil Hitler, since I wasn't Jewish, and I came from Germany. It must have been Hitler. So I was really being ostracized. I felt not part of the community at all. But the only group that really helped me was Christian Family Service. Finally took a hand in me and handling me. They sent me to summer camp. They talked to my parents about having me fit in more with the American children, and they bought me a compact they talked to my parents, and they also talked to my parents about letting me wear a bra, which in Europe the women didn't wear bras, it was free for some reason or other. So my parents gave permission, but not really. But since I always sewed, I started to look at ads in the newspaper and the magazines, and I started to make my own bras. And, sewing. Sewing was my field. So I could integrate a little bit more into the community. I didn't integrate in Germany with the school children. They didn't want me. In coming to America, I didn't integrate either, because I really wasn't part of the culture, the religion or the culture. In Ecuador, I somehow felt not superior in a way, but to a point where I could, superior in the way in that I could help, in that I could I could show things, I could learn. I felt more adult. I felt much more grown up in Ecuador. And one of the things that Ecuador instilled in me was the love of Indians, Native Americans. So this became my focus as I grew older in America. I did volunteer work, about 8 elder hostels in the Native American community in Acoma, with the Hopis, covering the petroglyphs, and just teaching in the children with the Navajos. And this has been my interest. So Ecuador really influenced my interest in the Native Americans and my sharing what I had. I've always had a tender heart for people, and I think that started in Germany when I had my big kidney operation in 1936, where the nuns were so caring for me and so gentle that I carried this on in Ecuador, and I was never nasty. I was always like a caring and sharing person, and this carried on to me in America also, when I'm still caring for one of the black women in my neighborhood where I live. I'm the Jewish mother, and because I help her, I shop for her and I help her. I don't understand the word she says because she has the southern Appalachia accent, but I listen to her and I help her out. I'm Jewish and I'm not Jewish. I'm not Jewish in that I don't follow the religion or the holidays, except socially, very rarely. But I'm Jewish because the Jewish religion is gone through the mother and the grandmother and the family. So yes, I consider myself Jewish, but also I don't have to assimilate with the Jews. I feel distant from the religious Jews. What I have learned is the Jewish families, the Jewish people in Europe, obviously they had a tough time because so many of them were picked up. My mother with the telephone, when she answered it, another family got picked up to a concentration camp. I did, however, find out that one of my mother's cousins was a couple of years younger than I am, Hannelore, and she was sent with the Quakers to Sweden. So she did survive, and we've been in touch with her family and visiting, and it's been absolutely wonderful. This is our contact with the Jewish families that we had. But otherwise, the contact is completely lost. And people, my mother's niece, who did not consider herself Jewish, who was very beautiful, and she dated Aryans, and so was finally picked up and sent to a concentration camp. So people disappeared. The only one who survived is her younger brother, Arno. He was in the concentration camp in Theresienstadt, and he worked in the kitchen, and somehow he survived. And my daughter and I, when we went to visit him, he was in California, we asked him, "How did you survive?" And he says, "Don't ask." So probably in the kitchen, he either bribed the soldiers with food, or he stole food from from the other inmates or what, but his granddaughter has also written a memoir on him. My parents never, if they talked about Ecuador after we came here, I guess I just didn't pay attention to them. I was a teenager and I really wasn't interested in their thoughts or what they, in their life, really. Interested in their life, yes, but not in what they were thinking. Because my mother was the bookworm and was always, with my brother, the brain, and I really, really resented this. I was more the hands-on person like my father, working with hands, working with tools, and I was not really interested in this book stuff. So I tried to be a teenager and get away from them. If I had one thing to say to the Ecuadorians about my experience there, what I could take back with me is that it was so good to be able not to be restrained the way I was in Germany, but I felt free here. I wasn't, I could be myself. I really felt unrestrained, and it was a good, like a healing process for me.